Welcome students to Chapter 9, which covers disorders featuring somatic symptoms, which are physical manifestations of psychological problems. So we'll be talking about various kinds of those. The DSM-5 categorizes different types of somatic symptoms that are caused by psychological factors, and these symptoms trigger excessive anxiety or concern. We have things like factitious disorder, conversion disorder, somatic symptom disorder, illness anxiety disorder, and psychological factors that affect other medical conditions. In factitious disorder, this can be either imposed on yourself or someone else, and it's where there's a false creation of physical, psychological symptoms or deceptive production of injury or disease, even without any kind of external reward for that. So you fake something wrong with you or with someone else. You either present yourself or the other person as ill, damaged, or hurt. If it's imposed on yourself, that used to be called Munchausen syndrome. And if you impose it on another person, that used to be called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Links to this include poor social support or relationships, little family life, perhaps extensive medical treatment in childhood, a grudge against the medical profession, and interestingly, employment as nurses, lab technicians, or aides. Causes and treatment are really not well understood at this time. We've been unable to understand what produces this problem to develop effective treatments for the disorder. Conversion disorder is when there are neurological-like symptoms that are inconsistent with any known neurological or medical disease, and this usually begins in late childhood and young adulthood and may appear suddenly during extreme stress. It's not consciously wanted or purposefully produced. One example is glove anesthesia. So in the left-hand picture, you see the entire hand extending from the fingertips to the wrist becoming numb, where that doesn't really correspond to what actually happens when there's neurological problems in your hand. So conversion disorder is poorly understood. Somatic symptom disorder is where at least one upsetting or repeatedly disruptive physical symptom is produced. There's an unreasonable number of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors associated with that symptom, and the symptoms usually continue to some degree for more than 6 months, and there's really disproportionate amounts of time and energy spent on the symptoms or their health implications because there's lots of anxiety around them. So what causes conversion and somatic symptom disorders? They were previously called hysterical disorders. They are widely considered unique and in need of special explanation, but none has really received much research support, and the disorders are still poorly understood. In the Freudian tradition, the psychodynamic view says that these two disorders relate to underlying emotional conflicts that are converted into physical symptoms and concerns. And there are two defense mechanisms, primary and secondary gain, meaning that we get something out of it, that are involved. Contemporary psychodynamic theories disagree with Freud on many points, but they do agree that patients carry unconscious conflicts from childhood that cause anxiety, and that can turn into physical pain. In the cognitive behavioral tradition, these theorists would look at physical symptoms of disorder as being rewarded and maintained through reinforcement. The symptoms create distance from unpleasant relationships. So if we're sick, then we can put someone else at an arm's length. It may bring attention to us. The source of communication is influenced by modeling of knowledge of medical problems. There are secondary gains from creating this physical issue. The view has not been widely tested, though, and is not supported by research. In the multicultural view, We note that some Western clinicians do not advocate excessive focus on somatic symptom disorders included in the DSM-5. Others see this as bias. This view says that formation of somatic complaints is the norm in many non-Western cultures. So what does that tell us? It tells us that somatic issues are okay. You know, they're widely across many cultures manifestations of psychological problems, and it's not viewed in terms of some kind of disorder or negativity. How are conversion and somatic symptom disorders treated? The focus is on the cause of the disorder, trying to help people have insight into that, exposure therapies, and drug therapies. They may focus on the symptoms and educate the client about those. They may provide reinforcement for better, functioning, and then try to also restructure cognitive thought processes. Illness anxiety disorder is a preoccupation with thoughts or high anxiety about having or getting a significant illness. There is an absence of substantial somatic symptoms, but an unduly high number of health-related behaviors, going to the doctor all the time, or dysfunctional health avoidance behaviors. Concerns continue to some degree for at least 6 months, and formerly this was called hypochondriasis. So just a huge preoccupation with some kind of issue that really doesn't seem to be worthy of that level of concern. Illness anxiety disorder can begin at any age, but starts most often in early adulthood. There's no gender difference. Theoretical explanation and treatment are similar to those for anxiety disorders or OCD. Drug and cognitive behavioral approaches can be used. Then we have psychophysiological disorders or psychological factors that affect other medical conditions. And the early DSM labels included psychophysiological disorders. In the DSM-5 text revision, we include psychological factors that affect other medical conditions as the terminology. The characteristics of these disorders are different from factitious conversion and illness anxiety disorders. They involve a significant number of medical symptoms and conditions and often result in serious physical damage. The psychophysiological disorders are characterized by affected persons having a medical condition and the psychological factors negatively affect that condition. They affect the course of the medical condition, they provide obstacles to treatment, they pose new health risks, or they trigger or worsen the medical condition. So, for example, compulsive eating might really produce problems for a person that has issues with diabetes, something along those lines. So, the person's psychology is affecting something that's going on with them physically. Traditional psychophysiological disorders that are exacerbated by, cognitions or other psychological function include ulcers, asthma, insomnia, chronic headaches, migraine headaches, and hypertension. Several variables contribute to the development of psychophysiological disorders. Biological factors include defects in the autonomic nervous system that can contribute to the development. Other more specific biological problems also contribute. Psychological factors include needs, attitudes, emotions, personality, or coping styles that may cause people to react repeatedly to stressors. And this overreaction can increase their chance of developing these disorders that combine psychology and physiology. Sociocultural factors include adverse social conditions that produce stress, triggers, and interact with biological and psychological factors. These include things like poverty and dangerous environments, discrimination, health problems, and genetic predispositions. We, in this vein, look at are physical illnesses related to stress? And in 1967, there was research that examined the relationship between life stress and onset of illness. And you can see that participants with colds were highly related to psychological stress index on the social adjustment rating scale. So there definitely is a relationship between stress and physical illness. The most stressful life events that produce problems are the death of a spouse, divorce and marital separation, also jail term, death of a close family member, and you can look at some of the others. For students, specifically death of a family member or friend, having lots of tests, having finals week, applying to graduate school, being a victim of a crime, and some of these others that you can look at. So these things can, again, produce some physical problems. Behavioral medicine combines psychological and physical interventions to treat or prevent medical problems. And so this is what psychology as a field has come up with to help reduce the impact of psychological problems on medical problems. So relaxation training makes a difference, biofeedback, meditation, hypnosis, cognitive behavioral interventions, support groups, and the ability to express your emotions, and then a number of combination approaches can make a difference. And this concludes the chapter on somatic disorders, and I will pick it up with the next chapter.